Sometimes when you talk about ancient cultures, it's difficult because blue and green, if you look at the color wheel, since we're going there, so when you look at the color wheel, blue and green are very close. And we would all call this one blue, we would all call this one green. The problem with ancient languages is this. So anything in between, a bit of the teal, and then all of the different in-betweens when like it's blue but it's getting towards green, the place where you put a line and say it stops being blue and it becomes green after you cross this, it's different in so many cultures and in so many language that it's why translating other languages can become problematic when you're like, okay, but to you, is this a blue or is it a green? It happens in Chinese, it happens in Old Norse, it happens in African languages. In fact, there are African languages that have, they don't differentiate between blue and green, but they will differentiate between varieties of subcategories of green that we don't. So like, and then of course, it's a fascinating thing. I absolutely love how colors work within the realm of translation. This, in fact, it's an even better example. Where do you draw the line is cultural and it's a construct. And so it varies enormously. Now, clearly, the waves are the same, but what stops becoming blue and turns into green, yeah, it varies. Even modern languages. Japanese, man, I've had a few discussions with the Japanese because I was like, they were like, can you pass me the blue cup? And I'm like, there is no blue cup. Like the one over there. And I'm like, oh, that's green. No, that's blue. Because we were placing that mark in a different section, which is why the stoplight in Japanese is consistently called blue, while for me, it's green. Yeah, the translator is colorblind. Yeah, that can make things even a bit more complicated, right? Yeah, the stoplight is still red. That's true. The Romans tell us of the difference between continental Celts and island Celts, so in Britain. And it's so interesting because the Celtic realities in Britain are kind of frozen in time, in the sense that they still had chariots, even after chariots were abandoned in the continent within the Celtic tradition. They still had druids, even though the druids in Celtic, in the continental Gaul, they still had them. But the druids in Britain were considered to be repertoires of ancient knowledge that had gone lost, that was lost in the continent. And so continental Celts from Gaul would go to Britain to study, like a bit of an Erasmus, if you will, or like a, that's mentioned in the sources. And when you look at when you see Celts that are fighting the Romans and they have painted blue or green, we don't know if they were tattoos or it was actually body paint, but you know what I'm talking about. Those are Brittonic. Because even though we do have mentions, and that's what I believe, I've looked into the sources, and I think that the continental Gauls ancestrally did use body paints. There is a coin that shows a continental Gaul with a little swirl that we see in Brittonic context, but they had abandoned it. But they did keep it in the island. This often happens. Islands tend to be linguistically and socially more conservative when it comes to the preservation of ancient traditions. Yeah, woad, exactly. It's a flowering plant of the family Brassicaceae. It's also called glastrum, woad. The Romans call it vitrum. So he's correct when it comes to Isati stinctoria, woad, as the plant used to make these. We don't know if this is actual paint or if they are tattoos. It is possible that it's one or the other, maybe both. They're both likely. Also because the term in Latin that they use when they talk about the act of this is the same that they use. It can also be translated as dyeing. It's like when you permanently dye clothing. So at that point it's like, but is it tattoos then if it's permanent and it has, because in Latin it can have that. So it's possible that these were tattoos, or maybe not. Maybe they were actual paints. When it comes to the color that is mentioned in blue, well, let's look at the actual word. So in Latin, this is either described in two ways. Both Mela and Caesar use the word caeruleum. Caeruleum can translate as dark blue or the color of the sky and the sea, a variety of blue. There is another author that actually uses the term virdis, which means green. It's a little bit of a later author. It's Publius Ovidius, but it does say virdis. So we have two options. It was either blue, or it was green, or maybe it was both, or another possibility is that it was a color a little bit in between. You know, when blue and green, like aquamarina, that's another possibility. Now, whether or not, we don't know if they are tattoos or body paints, because the Latin verb that they use to describe this body paint, these colors that they applied to their skin, the Latin term can be used for both. Sometimes you use it for dyeing clothes, and when you dye a cloth, it's permanent, so it gives that idea, but we're not sure. We don't know. It could be that it's just body paint. Who knows? But the color it could be either blue or green, and we don't know once again because they use both. We have no idea. The supposed magic body paint armor, yeah, they thought they had some magical property, and a lot of it probably was ritualistic, psychological even. But yeah. Maybe some was green and some was blue. That's possible, Nicholas, yeah. They use both terms in Latin, so who knows? In period, we have a fantastic saying, and I don't get to use this one very often, so it's nice to say it. Julius Caesar says, open quotes, ipsorum lingua Celtae, nostra Galli appellantur. So if we take this Latin sentence, ipsorum lingua, so lingua means language, ipsorum, it's like their own. It can be translated, or actual is another way to translate. So in the actual language, or in their own language, ipsorum lingua Celtae. So in their own language, Celts. And then he says nostra, with omitting, because it's understood by context, language. So nostra meaning in ours, he's saying, in ours, Galli, so Gauls, appellantur. We call them, or we refer to them, or name them. So Julius Caesar, who had direct contact with Celtic populations, because that's how he writes the De Bello Gallico, so he has this war of invasion, meets the continental Celtic realities, and remember that Julius Caesar, went to Britain. He didn't manage to conquer it, you'll have to wait for Claudius, but he did go. So he's an eyewitness to both continental Celts and insular Celts. And he tells us that in their language they are Celts, Celtae. He's kind of Latinizing it because he's speaking and writing in Latin, but definitely it's clear that the stem is Celt something, probably just Celt, and then he makes the suffix to create a plural in Latin. So he says in their language it's Celtae, that's how they call themselves, but we call them Gauls, Galli, and Gallia with a long A when it comes to phonemic vowel length, when it comes to the area. But it's very likely that instead, probably the term Gaul comes from a single tribe, and maybe the Romans extended that to all of them, at least in that area. When it comes to insular Celts, they do distinguish them, the Romans do distinguish them from the continental Celts, but it's important to underline that the Romans do not consider them separate, the ones in England, in Britain, from the ones in Caledonia, so Scotland. There is a difference, of course, between Gaelic, Scottish, Brittonic, Irish, absolutely. But from the perspective of a Roman, for the way they write, both not only Julius Caesar, which is the famous one, but to mention another one, Pomponius Mela, Roman geographer, they say, no, they're the same, they're all Celts. They do not distinguish. I do not believe it's because of ignorance. I do believe it's because they still weren't distinct enough, culturally, linguistically, and religiously, for the Romans to perceive them as different political entities. They will become different political entities, but you've got to wait until the 3rd century AD. If I'm not wrong, I didn't do a deep research for this one, but I'm saying for the Romans there was no difference. In fact, the only difference that the Romans mentioned, this is fascinating, between the Celts of southern Britain and the Celts of Scotland is the color of the hair, because they say that the southern Celts of southern England were blonde, but the northern Celts of Scotland tended to be more redhead, and that's it. And that's why, for example, even in the Sicilian language, we tend to do things that they did in Latin, but in modern Italian they don't do anymore, such as putting the verb at the end. We tend to do it in the emphatic clause. And similarly, likewise, which one is the Nordic country that has a closer connection to Old Norse, Iceland, because it's an island. So islands tend to preserve traditions that then the continents usually change. And so that's why I think a lot of these ritualistic aspects of Celtic realities were found and preserved in the Brittonic context, but they were gone or considered obsolete, like the chariots in war, in continental warfare. And it's fascinating.